What You Do Is Who You Are, How to Create Your Business Culture by Ben Horowitz. Picture yourself as a slave in 1790s Haiti, back when it was called Saint-Domingue. This tiny island was the most profitable colony on Earth, a brutal machine of sugar and coffee production, powered by nearly 500,000 enslaved people. Life there was cheaper than anywhere else in the world. The death rate was so horrific it actually exceeded the birth rate. This place was a living nightmare. Your captors had mastered cruelty, inventing tortures so twisted they're almost unimaginable. Reading was forbidden. You were taught to trust absolutely no one, to focus only on making it through one more day. Now imagine that one man, born right into this hell, a man they mockingly called Sickly Stick as a child because he was so frail, decides to attempt the impossible. He decides to lead a revolution, not just some scattered uprising, but the only successful slave revolt in all of human history. A revolution so powerful, it would crush the armies of Spain, Britain, and even Napoleon himself. But here's the real question. How do you take a shattered culture, a population that's been systematically dehumanized and programmed purely for survival, and somehow transform them into a unified, disciplined fighting force capable of changing the world forever? This question sits at the absolute heart of a fascinating book by Ben Horowitz, one of Silicon Valley's most respected thinkers. The book is called What You Do Is Who You Are, and it's essentially a practical guide to one of the most powerful yet misunderstood forces in business and life: culture itself. Horowitz, who co-founded the legendary venture capital firm Andreessen Horowitz, was once a young, struggling CEO himself. Everyone kept telling him culture is the most important thing, but whenever he asked what culture actually was, or how he could intentionally shape it, the answers were frustratingly vague. Was it about having dogs in the office? Inspirational posters on the walls? Nope. He discovered that those things are just surface-level perks and wishful thinking. So he went hunting for real answers in the most unexpected places, not in business schools or corporate case studies, but in the stories of leaders who built extraordinary cultures under the most extreme circumstances imaginable. He studied Toussaint Louverture, that leader of the Haitian slave revolt. He studied the samurai of Japan, who ruled for 700 years guided by an honor code. He studied Genghis Khan, an outcast who built the largest empire in history through radical inclusion. And he even studied Shaka Senghor, a man who became the leader of a powerful prison gang and then completely transformed its purpose. What he discovered was a profound yet beautifully simple truth, a secret that applies whether you're running a global corporation, leading a small team, or just trying to build a better version of yourself. And that secret is right there in the title, What You Do Is Who You Are. By the end of this journey today, you'll understand this principle not as some catchy slogan, but as a practical blueprint for shaping the world around you. When Ben Horowitz first launched his company, LoudCloud, he genuinely believed the company's culture would naturally reflect his own personality and values. He'd lead by example, and everyone would simply follow along. He quickly discovered a painful truth: that method absolutely doesn't work. As the company grew, it didn't become this beautiful reflection of its founder. Instead, it became a chaotic patchwork of unintentional subcultures. Some managers were screamers who absolutely terrified their teams. Others gave virtually no feedback at all. The moment he truly grasped the problem was when he discovered that one of his marketing managers, someone he'd thought was this great storyteller, was actually a compulsive liar. The worst part? It had taken years to figure this out, and during that time, the guy had actually been promoted. The lesson everyone else in the company learned wasn't honesty is our policy. The real lesson was, you can lie here, and you might even get ahead doing it. It didn't matter one bit what Horowitz personally believed. What mattered was what the company actually did. This is the core challenge that sets us on our journey. Culture isn't about your beliefs or the values you write on some poster. Your culture is actually the sum total of all those tiny decisions your people make every single day, especially when nobody's watching. Should I return this phone call today or tomorrow? Should I stay at the fancy hotel or the cheap one? Should I point out what my coworker is doing wrong or what they're doing right? Your company's mission statement can't answer these questions. Your culture does. Culture is like the operating system running in the background, quietly guiding every single action. And if you don't intentionally design it, it'll be accidental and probably a mess. So how do you actually design it? This is where Horowitz turns to his first great teacher, Toussaint Louverture. Louverture faced what might be the ultimate cultural challenge ever. He had to completely reprogram a slave culture, built entirely on distrust, short-term thinking, and pure survival, into something capable of building an actual nation. He accomplished this using a set of brilliant techniques that are just as powerful today. First, Louverture taught us to keep what works. You can't create a new culture from absolutely nothing. You have to build it on the strengths that already exist. The slaves in Haiti had this secret communication tool, their voodoo songs. To the French soldiers, it just sounded like noise. But to Louverture's army, it was basically an encrypted network. By weaving signals into the verses of their songs, his scattered troops could coordinate surprise attacks with perfect timing. He took a piece of their old world and transformed it into a weapon for their new one. Steve Jobs did exactly the same thing when he returned to a dying Apple in 1997. Everyone, analysts, experts, even Apple's co-founder Steve Wozniak, told him the company was failing because it stubbornly insisted on making both the computer and the software. They said he needed to be more like Microsoft and just license the software. But Jobs knew that Apple's soul, its core strength, had always been the beautiful integration of hardware and software. That was the magic. So instead of abandoning it, he doubled down, killing off most of Apple's products to focus laser-sharp on that one core strength. He kept what worked, and it eventually made Apple the most valuable company in the world. Louverture's second, and perhaps most powerful technique, was to create shocking rules. A shocking rule is something so strange, so counterintuitive, that it forces everyone to ask, why? And the answer to that why becomes a story that programs the culture deep down. In Louverture's army, built on the foundation of slavery where trust was non-existent, he desperately needed to make trust the central pillar. So he created this shocking rule. Married officers were absolutely forbidden from having concubines. Now, in the context of an 18th century army, where pillaging and assault were basically the norm, this was completely absurd. His officers must have been totally dumbfounded. You want us to be loyal to our wives. Why on earth? And the answer was the lesson. Because in this army, your word is everything. If we can't trust you to keep your word to your wife, we sure as hell can't trust you to keep your word to us. With one shocking rule, he embedded honesty, loyalty, and trust deep into the very fabric of his army. This technique is actually everywhere once you start looking for it. When Tom Coughlin became coach of the New York Giants, he instituted Coughlin time. If you're on time for a meeting, you're late. He started every single meeting 5 minutes early and fined players thousands of dollars for showing up at the scheduled time. The players were furious. The press called him a tyrant. Everyone asked why. The answer was the culture. It was a mindset of discipline, of being prepared, of being ready to work before the clock even started. That culture won him 2 Super Bowls. At Amazon, Jeff Bezos wanted to build a culture of extreme frugality, so the company could always offer the absolute lowest prices. The shocking rule? For years, every employee worked at a desk, literally made from a cheap wooden door bought at Home Depot. A new hire would sit down and ask, "Why am I working on a door?" And the answer was always the same. We save money on things that don't matter to customers, so we can pass those savings on to them. The door desk was a physical, daily reminder of the company's core mission. Louverture didn't just reprogram his army's morals, he reprogrammed their self-image. His third technique was to dress for success. When he joined the rebellion, most soldiers were fighting naked, just as they'd worked in the fields. To give them a genuine sense of being an elite fighting force, He had them dress in the most elaborate European military uniforms they could find. It seemed absurd. Weren't they fighting to destroy the Europeans? No. They were fighting to build an army that was even better. The uniforms were a constant, visible reminder of who they were becoming. This seems simple, but it's actually profound. When Mary Barra took over as CEO of General Motors, she wanted to dismantle its suffocating bureaucracy. The ultimate symbol of this bureaucracy was the company's 10-page dress code, with rules about absolutely everything. She replaced all 10 pages with just 2 words: dress appropriately. The managers panicked. They came to her and said, "This isn't enough. What does that even mean?" And her response forced them to do something they hadn't done in years: actually manage. They had to talk to their teams, use their judgment, and take real responsibility. The new dress code wasn't really about clothes at all. It was about empowerment. These techniques, keeping what works, creating shocking rules, dressing for success, are all about action. But Horowitz found another model of culture building that was based on something deeper, a state of mind. For this, he turned to the samurai of Japan. The samurai ruled Japan for nearly 700 years, an incredible reign made possible by their code, known as Bushido, or the Way of the Warrior. The most important lesson from the samurai is the difference between values and virtues. A value is a belief. A virtue is a belief you actively pursue. Most corporate values are just beliefs printed on a wall, which is exactly why they're worthless. The samurai built their entire culture on virtues, on action. What you do is who you are. And the core of their entire system, the shocking rule that powered everything else, was this: keep death in mind at all times. It sounds morbid, but the logic is actually beautiful. The samurai understood that if you truly accept that you could die at any moment, you live completely differently. You treat every interaction as if it might be your last. You pay meticulous attention to every detail, because you want to meet your end with honor, not looking sloppy or unkempt. This constant awareness of death didn't make them passive. It made them hyper-present, focused, and dedicated. It was the ultimate motivator for quality and care. This mindset is what separates good companies from truly great ones. The great ones understand that their time is limited. The market could shift, a competitor could emerge, they could go bankrupt tomorrow. By keeping death in mind, they focus on what truly matters: the quality of their work, the meaning behind their mission, and the way they treat people. The samurai also demonstrated how to build a complete cultural system. Their virtues like honor, politeness, and sincerity all balanced each other out. Honor, taken to an extreme, could lead to violence over the smallest insult, but it was balanced by politeness, a complex set of rules for how to behave with respect in every situation. And politeness, which could easily become fake, was in turn balanced by sincerity, the belief that a samurai's word was unbreakable and that politeness without truth was worthless. It's honestly a masterclass in cultural design. When Horowitz started his own firm, he wanted to build a culture of respect for entrepreneurs. But he knew that respect could be misinterpreted as just being founder-friendly, always taking the founder's side, even when they're clearly wrong. That creates a culture of lies. So like the samurai, he paired it with a balancing virtue: we tell the truth, even when it hurts. And he anchored it all in a daily action, a virtue: being on time for meetings with entrepreneurs, with a fine of $10 for every minute you're late. That small action forced a cascade of other positive behaviors: planning ahead, running meetings efficiently, and constantly remembering who the firm was really there to serve. Now, both Toussaint Louverture and the samurai built exclusive, tightly knit cultures. But what if your strategy requires the complete opposite? What if you need to grow rapidly, to absorb new people and new ideas constantly? For this, Horowitz turns to our third teacher, one of history's most feared and misunderstood leaders, Genghis Khan. Genghis Khan conquered more land than anyone in history, and he did it with a surprisingly small army. His secret weapon wasn't just his cavalry, it was his culture of meritocracy and inclusion. He grew up an outcast, betrayed by his own tribe's aristocracy. His early life taught him a revolutionary lesson for his time. Kinship and bloodlines meant absolutely nothing. A person's actions and loyalty were all that mattered. When he built his empire, he did something radical. He completely dismantled the old tribal structure. Your family name, your bone color, whether you were from a noble white bone lineage or a common black bone one, it was all totally irrelevant. Shepherds could become generals. He promoted people based purely on skill and loyalty. Even more radically, when he conquered a new people, he didn't enslave the soldiers. He executed their aristocratic leaders so they couldn't rise against him later, and then incorporated the soldiers directly into his own army. He made them his kin, encouraging intermarriage, and even having his own mother adopt a child from a defeated tribe. These new soldiers weren't treated as second-class citizens. They were treated as complete equals, with the same opportunity to rise and share in the spoils of the next conquest. As a result, they became fiercely loyal to him, often more loyal than they'd been to their original leaders. He saw talent where others saw only enemies. He was basically an equal opportunity employer on a global scale. When he encountered the highly civilized Uyghur people, he didn't destroy their culture. Instead, he absorbed it, using their scholars, scribes, and engineers to administer and improve his entire empire. He created a culture that was constantly learning, constantly upgrading itself by taking the best ideas from everywhere. This is a lesson many modern companies really struggle with. They talk endlessly about diversity, but they practice a kind of urban HR, creating separate programs for different groups, which only highlights their differences. Genghis Khan's approach was the complete opposite. It was true inclusion. There was one standard, one path to success, and it was open to everyone, regardless of their background. Don Thompson, who rose from the Cabrini Green housing projects in Chicago to become the first African-American CEO of McDonald's, understood this instinctively. At McDonald's, there were networks for women, for African Americans, for Latinos. One day, a group of white male employees came to him and asked, "Who's thinking about us?" A lot of leaders would have just dismissed them. But Thompson heard their underlying anxiety about being left out. So he said, "You're right. We need a white male network." He created what they called the Inclusion Network, because he understood a profound truth. Either you're inclusive or you're not. You can't just be inclusive for certain groups. The goal is to see every individual for who they are and what they bring to the table. This brings us to our final and most modern teacher, Shaka Senghor. His story shows us culture from the ground up, from the perspective of a new employee in the toughest organization imaginable, a state prison. Senghor entered prison at 19 for a murder he'd committed. The moment he was released from quarantine into the general population, he got his cultural orientation. He watched a man get stabbed in the neck, calmly and casually. That one event taught him everything he needed to know about how to survive. This is a critical insight. Your new employees learn more about your culture on their first day than from any handbook or speech. They're watching everything. Who has power? What behaviors get rewarded? What gets you in trouble? Their first impressions are absolutely seared in. Senghor joined a gang called the Melanics, which had a code of black uplift and self-determination. But he quickly saw that the leaders weren't actually living the code. They were charismatic, sure, but they were exploiting their own members. Senghor rose to power not through violence, but by holding the leadership accountable to their own stated values. He forced them to walk the talk. But then came the turning point. After building the Melanics into the tightest, most feared squad in the prison, he had a moment of clarity. In a tense situation, he suddenly realized that the culture he'd perfected was a culture of, in his words, savages. The very rules and loyalties he'd enforced had created an outcome he no longer believed in. This is honestly the hardest journey for any leader. He had to change himself to change the culture. He began to use his power completely differently. Instead of just enforcing the code of loyalty, he started teaching his men about empathy and emotional intelligence. He used his status to create a new culture, one focused not just on surviving prison, but on preparing for life outside, on healing the brokenness they'd all come from. He used a technique of constant contact, requiring his men to eat together, study together, and talk together every single day, to slowly but surely shift their entire way of being. Senghor's story reveals that culture is never static. It must be constantly examined and reshaped. As a leader, you might build something powerful, only to realize it's not what you truly want. And the only way to change it is to start with yourself. So what do all these stories teach us? Horowitz distills them into a practical playbook for any leader. It starts with being yourself. A culture has to be authentic to the leader. The basketball player Charles Barkley famously said, "I am not a role model," because he was trying to be one person in public and another in private. It was exhausting. His teammate, Hakeem Olajuwon, said the opposite, "I am a role model," because he was the same person everywhere. You simply can't lead effectively if you're pretending to be someone you're not. Next, your culture and strategy must be aligned. The famous saying, "Culture eats strategy for breakfast," is actually wrong. A culture of frugality works perfectly for Amazon because its strategy is low prices. That same culture would have absolutely destroyed Apple, whose strategy is to build the most beautiful products in the world, no matter the cost. Finally, every strong culture needs a few universal elements. One is trust. Building trust is hard because telling the truth often feels terrifying. It can feel like corporate suicide. The key is not to hide the bad news, but to assign it meaning. When Abraham Lincoln gave the Gettysburg Address after the bloodiest battle of the Civil War, he didn't downplay the horrific loss of life. Instead, he gave it profound purpose, reframing the war as a test of whether a nation, quote, "conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal," could endure. He told the truth, but he also told a story that gave that truth meaning. That's the job of a leader. Another essential element is openness to bad news. In any organization, there are what you might call kimchi problems, issues that are buried deep and just getting hotter. You have to create a culture where people feel genuinely safe, bringing problems to the surface, where they know you'll focus on the issue, not attack the person. When a leader hears bad news, they shouldn't get angry. They should get excited. Great! Now that we know about it, we can fix it before it kills us. From a slave revolt that birthed a nation, to a warrior code that lasted centuries, from a prison yard to the boardrooms of Silicon Valley, the lesson is the same. Culture is not magic. It's a system of behaviors, and you can design it. It starts with deciding what you value, but it only becomes real when you translate those values into concrete actions. It becomes real when you create shocking rules that make people think, when you walk the talk even when it's hard, and when you recognize that in the end, it is the simplest and hardest truth of all. What you do, day in and day out, is who you are. As we wrap up our exploration of what you do is who you are, I want to leave you with a few thoughts on why this book is so powerful, especially for anyone trying to lead or grow. What I find most remarkable about Ben Horowitz's work is his genuine humility. Here's a man at the absolute pinnacle of the tech world, someone who's built and funded billion-dollar companies. Yet when he wanted to understand the deepest truths about leadership and culture, he didn't look to his peers. He looked to a slave, a warrior, a conqueror, and a convict. He understood that the most profound lessons often come from the margins, from those who had to build something from absolutely nothing against impossible odds. This is the first great lesson. Wisdom is everywhere, if you're humble enough to look for it. The answers to your biggest challenges may not be in the places everyone else is looking. They might be in a history book, in the story of a distant ancestor, or in a conversation with someone whose life looks nothing like your own. The second powerful idea is the shift from beliefs to actions, from values to virtues. We live in a world absolutely obsessed with what people say they believe. We post our values on social media, we wear them on t-shirts. But this book reminds us that none of that actually matters. Your character, your identity, your culture, it's not defined by your intentions. It's forged in your actions. This is incredibly empowering. It means you don't have to wait for the perfect feeling or the right belief to start becoming the person you want to be. You just have to start doing. So how can you apply this today? Here are a few simple ways. First, start observing actions, not just words. When you look at your group of friends, your sports team, or a club you're in, what do they actually do? Not what they say they're about, but how they genuinely behave. That's their real culture. Understanding this will make you a much shrewder judge of character and a more effective leader. Second, try creating your own shocking rule. It doesn't have to be dramatic. It could be just for yourself. Maybe it's, I always put my phone away when someone is talking to me. It's a simple action, but it's so rare today that it's actually shocking. And the why behind it, because I value presence and respect, will start to reprogram your own personal culture. And finally, remember that your personal culture is the foundation for everything else. Before you can lead a company, you have to lead yourself. The small things you do every day, whether you show up on time, whether you keep your word, whether you choose to do the hard thing or the easy thing, are not just isolated events. They're programming who you're becoming. The journey from who you are to who you want to be is not some giant leap. It's a series of small, deliberate steps. It's a practice. That, I believe, is the beautiful and enduring message of this book. It's not about grand declarations. It's about the quiet, consistent, and courageous choice to act. That was a deep dive into What You Do Is Who You Are by Ben Horowitz. We've journeyed through some of the book's most powerful stories and principles today, but I have to be honest with you. A summary is like looking at a map of a beautiful country. The map can show you the landmarks and the main roads, but it can never replace the experience of actually walking the streets, breathing the air, and meeting the people. The real magic happens when you read the book yourself. It's in those quiet moments when a particular story or a simple phrase connects with you in a way you didn't expect. This summary is your map, designed to help you decide if this is a journey worth taking. If anything we've talked about today has sparked your curiosity, I genuinely encourage you to grab a copy. Reading it isn't just about learning. It's an experience that can genuinely change the way you see leadership, culture, and most importantly, yourself. A link to the book is in the description. Also, if you found this summary valuable and it gave you something to think about, please do me a small favor and hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. That way, you won't miss our next journey into another life-changing book from the Billionaire's Bookshelf. Your support means the world, and it allows us to keep exploring these incredible ideas together. Let's keep growing.